Before we get started with our tutorial, I'd like to show you my little mini ring so you can see the size of my hand, that this is a tiny little project, but it looks so cute on the door. Now the project that we're going to be doing today, I use the junior size tool, and this is my finished project. So let's get started. We have two fabrics, a light and a dark. Cut Gem 5 triangles from each one. Make a pentagon. Make 10 pentagons. Arrange them into an open ring. Sew 2, add a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Let's turn it over. This is the first half. Add a second half. Now where do you go from here? I'll walk you step by step through the details of finishing our open ring. I have a large piece of freezer paper. I trace the outline of this piece carefully with a mechanical pencil. I traced it again with a marker so that you can see it. Now I'm coming in 1/4 of an inch and drawing a line all the way around. You may be wondering why I want to do that. Well, it's because when I use fusible fleece and pillowcase the edge, I don't want the fleece or the batting to be sewn in. I want it to float because it makes such a nice crisp edge. I've pinned my pattern to the fusible fleece and now I'm going to cut it out. Remember, when you're bonding the fleece, the temperature needs to be lowered quite a bit. Here we have our two halves with the fleece fused to the wrong side of the fabric. Let's look at it from the other side. One thing I'd like you to notice is that the two halves are not the same. So the greens meet over here and the golds meet over here. Okay, so I've placed my two halves, nestled them together for the best use of fabric. On the end pieces, where I don't want to sew it closed, I've put 3 pins to remind myself not to sew it there. I'll be sewing with exact 1/4 inch seams, and those seams will not catch the fleece in the stitching. Another thing that it might be obvious, and cut this out so it's a more manageable piece. Okay, here's one that I've just rough cut out and sewn. I left the pins, the vertical pins in, just to show you that this is the place that it's open. Okay, once I have it sewn like this, I'm going to turn it over on the back and clip at each inside corner. And I'm just clipping through the backing. It'll make it look much better when you turn it inside out. So I'm going to trim away some of the tip, just a bit, to make that tip turn a little better. Now these are trimmed and I can remove my marking pins. And now I'm ready to turn this to the right side. And take your finger and go right to that point. We're just going to poke those tips and make sure they look nice and pointy. Make sure everything lays nice and flat. Let's turn it over. You can see what a nice edge we've got. Now here we have our two halves and they're pressed and ready to sew together. Put the two right sides together. Pay particular attention at this seam intersection. It's the pentagon seam where it joins the lining, the backing, right there. We want it to match the one on the other side. And I'm going to pin it so my seam allowances go back towards the lining. And I will start, about here, a little ways back, and I'm going to sew as far as I can comfortably get and stop. So here's what I've done. I start right at the seam allowance, sewed through the seam and approximately halfway. Next, I'm going to go to the other side. With my seams matched, I pin, then turn it over to sew the rest of the opening. For this junior, it's a 2-step process, and it would also be for the petite. But now the full and the mid-size, they're larger, and you can sew that portion in just 1 step. For that tiny mini, I just hand sew that little seam. Okay, so when we look at it from the back, we're going to make sure that I know I want this side to go under this side. So I'll press this seam so that it points in that direction. Make sure that lays nice and flat, and then take this edge, turn it under. Okay, here's a close-up view of that once it's been pressed. I'll just hand blind stitch that closed, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now you see how nice and smooth it is? Here's our open ring, all finished. And then my most recent one, I used the mini size and made this tiny wreath. This is the mini and this is the junior. There's a petite size in between, a mid and a full size. I hope you've enjoyed these tips on making the open ring. If you'd like to see more tutorials like this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you, and God bless.